Elijah Brooks, 82 years old, walked slowly into the courtroom, not as a criminal, but as a man with a simple mistake and a quiet hope. A retired math teacher, a widower, a man who had spent his life believing in rules and fairness. He stood in front of a judge expecting understanding, but instead of compassion, he was met with mockery, humiliation, and a courtroom that had already made up its mind. The walls were cold, polished to perfection, but devoid of warmth. The lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps, and the silence between the judge's words hit harder than any gavel. Elijah wore the same brown suit he had on the day of his retirement. Now faded and threadbare, but still proud. In his hands, he held a worn wool cap, trembling slightly, not from fear, but from age and quiet dignity. When his name was called, Judge Catherine Doyle didn't look up right away. When she finally did, it wasn't to see him, it was to assess him. Like a crack in a teacup she could toss away. Her words came sharp and fast. Not asking for truth, but assuming guilt. You didn't see the sign. Or maybe you thought the rules didn't apply to you, she sneered. The courtroom chuckled softly, the kind of laughter that shrinks a person. Elijah, calm but weary, explained he had lived on that street for 40 years and hadn't seen the newly posted sign hidden behind a tree branch. Ignorance is not an excuse. The judge snapped, ending any chance for dialogue. Then came the sentence that would freeze the room: law is law. Old man. With those 5 words, she didn't just deliver a judgment, she erased a man's lifetime of integrity in one breath. Elijah looked down, not in shame, but in disbelief. He didn't yell, he didn't plead, he simply stood there, silent, steady, shrinking only in the eyes of those who refused to see his worth. In that moment, the courtroom was not a place of justice, but a stage for arrogance. And yet, as Elijah stood holding his cap against his chest, something inside him shifted. Not anger, not fear, but resolve. The kind of quiet defiance that doesn't make noise, but shakes the foundation of something much bigger. The kind that begins revolutions not with fists, but with dignity, because sometimes, the smallest voice in the room is the one that echoes the louds. Before Elijah Brooks ever stood in that courtroom, he was something far more powerful than a defendant. He was a builder of minds. A quiet warrior in a world that didn't always see his worth. In the fall of 1964, he became the first black math teacher at Central Heights High School. On his first day, the principal refused to shake his hand, and some white parents pulled their children from his class. But Elijah didn't leave. He stayed. He taught algebra, geometry, and discipline. But more than that, he taught his students how to see beyond the limits the world tried to place on them. He bought notebooks with his own money, stayed after school to tutor, and walked students home when their neighborhoods weren't safe. He stood silently between a black student and 2 white officers once. When the boy was wrongly accused of theft, Elijah didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His presence alone was enough to change the course of that day. Over the years, he watched his students become engineers, teachers, even a mayor. But time moves fast, and memories fade even faster. After his wife Janice passed, his partner for 48 years, the house grew quiet. And the days began to stretch longer. No kids called, no one came to visit. The world forgot, until the tickets started showing up. First one, then another, each more absurd than the last. Bright orange slips stuck to the windshield of his old Ford Crown Victoria, a car as stubborn and loyal as the man who drove it. Elijah tried to fight it the right way. He called the city, waited on hold, took pictures, explained calmly, but no one listened. They heard his voice and heard weakness. They saw his age and assumed ignorance. They looked at his skin and saw someone easy to ignore. But they were wrong. Elijah Brooks was not a man you push aside. He had endured too much, taught too many, and stood too long for justice to be treated like noise. And now, after decades of silence, the man who once taught equations was ready to challenge the system that had forgotten him. The hallway outside the courtroom buzzed with uneasy silence, a kind of stillness that settles just before the truth explodes. Elijah sat alone on a wooden bench near the window, his wool cap resting in his lap, knees aching from the cold, eyes staring blankly at the polished floor that hadn't changed in 50 years, unlike everything else. Around him, people murmured, confused by the judge's sudden exit. But Elijah didn't speak, he simply waited, steady as stone. Then, a figure approached, not hurried, not hesitant, but deliberate. A woman sat beside him, not too close, just enough to say this moment was intentional. Her shoes were plain black flats, her blazer crisp, her badge tucked just enough to mean she didn't want it to speak before she did. Elijah glanced sideways, cautious. She turned to him with soft, steady eyes and said quietly, "You probably don't remember me, but I remember you." Elijah blinked. She continued, "I was in your class, 9th grade. Central Heights. Monica Dean." His breath caught, a flicker of memory stirred, cursive handwriting on old math tests. A girl with tangled blonde hair and a hunger that went beyond food. She smiled faintly. "You used to split your lunch with me. Half a peanut butter sandwich and one of those little juice boxes. You said a full stomach made a better brain." Elijah looked down at his hands. "I didn't think anyone remembered that," he whispered. Monica's voice dropped lower. "I never forgot." For a moment, time folded in on itself. Decades of distance vanished, and in their place sat two people, one who once gave, and one who had never stopped remembering. She leaned in slightly. "I work for the Department of Justice now. Special Investigations. I've been looking into Judge Doyle for over a year." Elijah's jaw tensed. "That woman," he muttered. Monica nodded. "She's part of something bigger. We believe she's been escalating charges, targeting vulnerable people, elderly, poor, black, people like you." He didn't flinch. He just listened. Monica's voice sharpened with purpose. "When I saw your name on the court docket, I knew I couldn't stay quiet anymore." Elijah turned, really seeing her now. That hungry girl had grown into a fighter, and for the first time in a long time, he wasn't alone. In a quiet cafe just blocks from the courthouse, Elijah stirred his coffee with the slow rhythm of a man who'd seen too much to be surprised anymore. Monica sat across from him, her tablet glowing between them like a portal to something far darker than either of them wanted to admit. "What I'm about to show you hasn't been made public," she said, tapping the screen. Maps, charts, and red markers lit up like a web of invisible traps across the city. "It's called Iron Loop," she explained. "It started as a way to reduce court backlog, but it evolved, or maybe devolved, into something else." She zoomed in. The lines revealed a pattern, not of mistakes, but of intentions. "It's a system designed to maximize fines and minimize resistance," she said, "and it targets people who are statistically less likely to fight back: the elderly, the poor, immigrants, people of color." Elijah leaned forward, the truth settling on him like a weight that was both heavy and familiar. "You weren't picked at random," Monica added. "Your neighborhood is a testing ground. They change signs overnight, silently update codes, then wait, and when the fines come in, they watch who pays without a fight." Elijah swallowed hard, eyes narrowing, not with confusion, but with recognition. "So this ain't about my car," he said slowly. Monica shook her head. "No, sir, it never was." She opened a list of names, neighbors, church members, familiar faces, all crushed beneath a system that counted on their silence. Some lost their homes, some went to jail, some just disappeared from the system altogether. Elijah's fingers trembled, not with age this time, but with quiet fury. He looked at Monica, voice low and resolute. "And the judge? She's part of it?" Monica hesitated. "Yes, but she's not the top. There's someone else, someone bigger, tied to the original contract that built this whole thing." The cafe around them faded into nothing. It was no longer about a ticket, a courtroom, or even a corrupt judge. It was a war hidden beneath paperwork. And Elijah Brooks, a retired teacher once deemed too quiet to matter, was beginning to understand he'd just become the front line. The room was silent, but Elijah Brooks could feel the noise of the world pressing in through the glass, decades of injustice. Years of being overlooked, and the quiet ache of being erased. He stared at the tablet Monica placed in front of him. His name already pulled up. The formal complaint just one signature away from triggering an investigation that could shake the very foundation of the system. Monica's voice was steady but solemn. If you sign this, we can file for an independent audit. It will open the records. It will start everything. But I need a name, a real victim. Elijah didn't answer at first. He just stared at the screen. The list of names he recognized: old neighbors, church friends, men and women who once shared cookouts and Sunday hymns, now turned into data points swallowed by silence. Some had lost homes, some their dignity, some had simply disappeared under layers of bureaucracy. He thought about the gavel, the judge's smirk, the coldness in her voice when she called him old man. He thought of Janice, his wife, and the way she used to remind him, gently but firmly, "Don't let them make you small. Eli, you are not small." His hand moved slowly toward the tablet, not from weakness but from the weight of choice. With every breath, he felt the years settle into steel. He had taught children to think for themselves, to find truth in logic and courage in questions, and now it was his turn to do the same. He looked at Monica, and when he spoke, there was iron in his tone. "They thought I wouldn't fight," he said, "thought I was too old, too tired, too quiet." And then, with one firm stroke, he signed his name. It wasn't just a complaint anymore. It was a declaration, a spark, a warning. Elijah Brooks was no longer just a forgotten man with parking tickets. He was a witness, a fighter, and the first voice in what would become a rising storm. Some battles are fought with fists, but this one would be fought with truth, and Elijah had just stepped onto the battlefield. 3 days after Elijah signed the complaint, the fight moved into the shadows. Monica called in a favor, not through official DOJ channels, but through the kind of back door that only opens when truth has teeth. The meeting wasn't on any schedule. It took place in a dimly lit back room of a downtown law office. No windows, no signs, just silence and tension thick in the air. At 9:03 a.m., Judge Catherine Doyle walked in, as composed and cold as ever. At 9:07, her assistant Miles Rooker entered, his presence slick and rehearsed. At 9:09, Elijah Brooks and Monica Dean took their seats across the table, not with fear, but with quiet, measured resolve. No pleasantries, no pretense, just 4 people and one truth aching to be heard. Monica slid a file across the table: screenshots, subpoenas, time-stamped court records, and flagged emails between Doyle and her clerk. Not enough to make headlines yet, but more than enough to rattle nerves. Rooker flipped through the documents with a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Circumstantial," he scoffed, taken out of context. Monica leaned forward. "It's not all I have, but it's enough to open an investigation, unless, of course, there's cooperation." Judge Doyle didn't flinch, but her fingers tapped the table, betraying the rhythm of unease. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the room had ears. A hidden camera behind the smoke detector streamed every word to a secure DOJ proxy. But then, everything shifted. Rooker's eyes scanned the room and stopped, on the vent. The detector, the faint blinking LED. He leaned back, smiled, and played his card. "Funny thing," he said, sliding a USB drive onto the table. "Someone accessed DOJ surveillance last week without a warrant." Judge Doyle turned to Monica, sharp and cold. "Is that true?" Monica froze. Her voice faltered. It was under temporary emergency clause, but Rooker cut in, smooth and deadly, without authorization. In seconds, the trap Monica had laid became a snare around her own feet. That afternoon, she was placed on administrative leave, her case reassigned, and Elijah, who had dared to believe he wasn't alone anymore, sat once more in the quiet that comes after betrayal. That night, with her badge suspended and her reputation on the edge of collapse, Monica drove in silence through rain-slicked streets, windshield wipers dragging across glass like the ticking of a countdown. She didn't go home. Instead, She went to the one person who had once told her she had instincts worth trusting, Gregory Sharp. Her old mentor, the man who had shaped her into an agent who could see through shadows. His house was quiet, lined with dusty shelves and medals from wars both literal and legal. He greeted her the way he always had, whiskey in one hand, wisdom in the other, but something in his eyes felt colder this time. Distant. Monica laid it all out. Elijah. The tickets. Iron Loop. The trap that had turned on her. She didn't cry, didn't flinch, she just told the truth. Raw and stripped of pretense. Gregory listened, nodded slowly, swirled his drink, then offered a single, chilling piece of advice: step back. Let it go. You've done enough. Monica blinked. You're telling me to walk away? He didn't raise his voice. I'm telling you to survive. And just like that, the door between them, the one built from trust and shared ideals, quietly closed. She left without a word. At home, she dug through old drawers until she found it. A hard drive Sharp had given her years ago. Labeled as training material. Failed models of government systems. But when she plugged it in, the screen told a different story. Folders titled Iron Loop version 0.3, Audit Sim, and target flags glowed in the darkness. Charts, names, racial profiling algorithms, time-stamped documents dated 4 years before Springfield ever launched the public-facing version. It wasn't a study guide. It was the blueprint. Her mentor hadn't just known about Iron Loop, he had built it. And he had used her as a pawn. She didn't scream, she didn't break, she picked up her encrypted phone and made one call. It's time, she told Elijah. Her voice didn't shake. We go public. He was quiet on the other end. Then he said the words that sealed their path. Let's make the first shot count. In that moment, truth became their only weapon, and they were done asking permission to use it. The church was falling apart, peeling paint, broken pews, no stained glass, no choir, but for Elijah Brooks, it was sacred ground. Years ago, he had taught free math lessons here to kids whose parents couldn't afford tutors. Some barefoot, some angry, some just hungry. Now, he stood beneath its cracked rafters not as a teacher, but as a witness. Monica worked quickly, unzipping a weathered pack and pulling out a satellite transmitter, the kind built for war zones and whistleblowers. Once this power's on, she whispered, we send everything, the files, the designs, the names. Elijah nodded, watching her fingers dance over keys with the same precision he once taught with chalk. You trust this thing? He asked. She smiled faintly. More than I trust people. A soft green light blinked, connection initializing, just as wind rustled outside. Then came a sound, dull and distant, like someone breathing through broken glass. Monica's head snapped toward the window. Get down. The bullet shattered the frame, splinters exploding like firecrackers. Elijah threw his coat over her as another shot rang out. She gasped, hit in the side, but gritted her teeth. I'm okay, she lied, blood blooming beneath her jacket, crawling behind the crumbling pulpit. Elijah pressed a strip of cloth to her wound. Her voice shook. They know, they're here. He didn't panic. Then we send it, he said, rising slowly, staying low. The shooter waited outside, patient and precise. Elijah reached the transmitter. It blinked, awaiting confirmation. One tap, then another. Go live? The screen asked. He looked back at Monica, bleeding but unbroken, and pressed yes. The camera lens opened, across private networks and encrypted streams. An old man's face appeared, creased, battered, but burning with fire. My name is Elijah Brooks, he said, calm and clear. I used to teach math, but today, I teach justice. As bullets slammed against stone behind him, he didn't flinch. His voice carried not rage, but resolve. This system only works if we stay quiet. Well, I'm not quiet anymore. And across a fractured nation, a single voice echoed, once dismissed, now undeniable, because sometimes revolutions don't begin with marches or flags. Sometimes, they begin with an old man, A stolen voice reclaimed, and a truth too powerful to silence. It started with a single ping. Then two. Then thousands. Elijah Brooks' livestream spread like wildfire. First across private networks, then encrypted forums, then into newsrooms starving for truth. Within minutes, his quiet, unwavering voice, "Today I teach justice," was everywhere. Not just reposted by activists and journalists, but by nurses after long shifts, veterans with weathered hands, bus drivers on their lunch breaks, and teachers grading papers late into the night. People who knew what it felt like to be unheard saw themselves in Elijah's defiance. And from that spark, a chorus began to rise. One by one, victims of the iron loop system stepped into the light. A single mother in Detroit, evicted over unpaid fines she never even saw coming. A grandfather in New Orleans, jailed for missing a court date he was never notified of. A war veteran in Phoenix fined for parking in front of his own home. Their stories, once buried under bureaucracy and shame, now sang together like a protest hymn. The flood couldn't be stopped. Within 24 hours, a familiar face appeared on national news, Senator Corey D. Harris. Calm and composed, eyes heavy with purpose. "When I was 14, he said, I got caught shoplifting a calculator. Mr. Brooks didn't call the police. He sat me in the front row and taught me how to solve for X. I wouldn't be here without him." Then, looking directly into the camera, he declared a full investigation into the Iron Loop network. "We will dismantle every piece of it," he promised. The dominoes fell fast. Judge Catherine Doyle was suspended. Miles Rooker was arrested. Monica Dean returned to the DOJ, not just reinstated, but promoted. Now leading the Division for Judicial Integrity. And Elijah, he sat by his window in the quiet house on Oak Street, a warm cup of tea in hand, as the evening news finally told a story that sounded like justice. He didn't smile, didn't cry, he just listened. And as the world finally listened back, he knew something had cracked. A neighbor's boy waved through the fence. Elijah nodded gently. The system hadn't changed overnight, but now, the silence was broken, and in that break, the light had found a way in. It was a quiet morning, the kind Elijah Brooks had always cherished, the kind with birdsong on the fence, the scent of fresh bread from the corner bakery, and no news vans or phone calls or threats. Just peace. He sat by the window, tea in hand, the sun warming the faded curtains, when 3 soft knocks echoed from the front door. Rising slowly, he opened it to find a boy, maybe 10, nervous, hair half-combed, backpack hanging too big on his shoulders. "Are you Mr. Brooks?" the boy asked, voice thin but brave. Elijah nodded gently. "I am." The boy fidgeted. "My mom showed me your video. She said you used to be a teacher, that you helped people." Elijah's eyes softened. "I tried." The boy hesitated, then blurted out, Do you still teach?" Elijah didn't answer right away. Instead, he opened the door wider and smiled. "What's your name?" "Tyler." The boy said. "You like math?" Tyler, a shrug. "Sometimes." Elijah chuckled. That deep, chest-born kind of laugh that only comes from a soul tested but unbroken. "How about justice?" Tyler blinked, confused. "What's that?" Elijah stepped back and gestured inside. "Come on, I'll show you." Out back, the grass was still uneven, the old wooden fence leaning but proud. And in the shed, like it had waited all this time, was the board Elijah once used to teach a generation. He set it across 2 milk crates, wiped it clean, and picked up a piece of chalk. Tyler sat on the porch step, backpack forgotten, eyes wide. Elijah tapped the board. "Lesson 1, he said, and with slow, deliberate care, he wrote, "Justice equals knowledge plus courage." Then he turned to the boy, chalk in hand. "Now let's figure out what that really means." And as the camera pulled back, past the porch, the fence, the rooftops, 2 figures remained in the frame, an old teacher with a heart full of memory, and a new student holding a future not yet written. Between them, in the stillness, something had been planted, and far away, in a glass tower untouched by morning light, a new system was awakening, But this time, it would not go unchallenged. Far above the sleeping city, in a tower of glass and steel untouched by the chaos below, a single light burned through the midnight dark. The room was cold, sterile, no family photos, no signs of life, only blinking monitors, humming servers, and a man standing alone. He faced the window, hands clasped behind his back. His reflection faint in the glass, silver hair, a sharp jaw, eyes like locked vaults. On the wall, Elijah Brooks' live stream replayed in silence, frame by frame, word by word, until the moment he said it, "Today I teach justice." The man didn't blink, didn't flinch. He simply turned away and walked toward a sleek black table, where a single folder sat waiting. Its cover bore no name, only 3 red words: Phase 2, Wildfire. He opened it slowly. Inside, encrypted names, coded maps, target lists stretching beyond Springfield, far beyond. This wasn't about one corrupt judge, or a crooked assistant, or even Iron Loop. This was infrastructure. This was power with roots that reached into cities unseen and systems untouched by exposure. A knock at the door. A younger man entered, nervous, suit too stiff. "Sir, should we initiate containment protocols?" The older man didn't turn around. He reached for a small remote and pressed a button. The screen blinked off. Elijah's face vanished into darkness. "No," he said quietly, almost to himself. "They think it's over. They think they won." He stepped to the window, looking out over the sprawl of lights below, a city unaware. A nation half asleep. But the real system hasn't even started yet. He paused, long enough for the weight of the words to settle. "Now we begin." And somewhere far beneath him, in the unseen circuits and silent cues of the next operation, a new list was being written. It wouldn't make headlines, yet. There would be no live stream this time. No chalkboard, just pressure, precision, and programming disguised as progress. But what they hadn't counted on was the voice they'd tried to silence becoming a symbol. What they hadn't prepared for was that once a seed of truth takes root, no system, no matter how sophisticated, can erase it without a fight. And this time, the fight was coming for them.